So there's a story behind every company, and that story has lots of chapters, some good, some bad, and some ugly. These chapters are what make each company's journey unique. Everyone always wants to know how I began my career, what my previous experiences were in the industry, my education, and all sorts of other information that led me to where I am today. So here it is. This is my story from the genesis to today and everything in between. I'm unique in how I started. I never worked for a landscape company prior to starting mine. I didn't even really ever cut my own grass at home when I was in high school. My dad used a chuck and a truck to cut our grass, and he always just left him a check under the grill every month. I was so busy playing baseball and going to school that I didn't have time to do any of that. People often ask me what I would do differently if I started over again, and the answer is very simple. I would have at least cut my own grass when I was a kid, man. And on top of that, it would have been wise to have worked for a landscape company in some capacity when I was younger before I started, but regardless, here I am. My goal growing up was to become a high school history teacher and a baseball coach. I spent my entire life playing baseball, and that's something that I'm super passionate about, as you guys know. However, my high school coach gave me some advice before I went off to college, and he told me,
coaching at the high school level doesn't pay very well, and it takes a lot of time away from your family.
if you truly want to coach, then you should look into being a college level coach. I understood what he was saying, but I was also passionate about teaching because after all, being a teacher is the same thing as being a coach. The only difference is you aren't coaching a sport, you're coaching a subject. So naturally, I was drawn to it just as much. I went on to play college baseball at 3 different colleges and universities. I ultimately graduated from the University of West Georgia, where I finished my baseball career and graduated with a history degree and a minor in archaeology. For whatever reason, I thought I could be the next Indiana Jones, but boy was I wrong. So during my final year of school at the University of West Georgia, I was living with one of my good friends from high school that also played baseball with me. We lived in a little 1-bedroom apartment, and I slept on the couch. At the time, we were so broke that we didn't even have cable or a second bedroom, so we hijacked the Wi-Fi from the people downstairs. We used this Wi-Fi to stream Hulu back when it was free, and it was on your computer. We didn't have much to choose from, and we began watching Shark Tank and other shows like that. From watching all those shows, I began to develop my entrepreneurial spirit. I would spend my days in my final classes daydreaming about starting a company. I had no real-world experience in anything other than baseball, so I didn't know what direction to go, but I knew I wanted to build something great, something I could pour my heart and soul into, and ultimately become wealthy at some point. I also spent a summer as a golf caddy in a pretty nice golf course, and everybody that was super rich that I caddied for would tell me
I owned an X company.
So it became my mission to figure out what kind of company I would own. I settled on landscape because honestly I felt it would be the easiest thing for me to learn. Green side up, right? How hard could it be? Here's a cool little tidbit. My company colors were established at this time in college before I even know what my company name would be. Picture this, I was sitting in one of my history classes and there was a guy that sat in front of me every single day, and he would wear a Tampa Bay Rays hat and he would wear it backwards. So sitting behind him, I would just stare at it and I'd look at it and I'd think to myself, you know, whenever I start my company, those are gonna be the colors that I have. And here we are. The day I graduated from college, my dad picked me up and took me to play golf. As we played, we discussed my future, what I was gonna do, where I was gonna live, what my plans were. I told him that I think I was gonna start a landscape company. We discussed it throughout the entire day, and the next day, my dad took me down to Howard Brothers in Duluth and co-signed on a mower setup for me. Then after that, we went straight to JW Trucks in Oakwood, Georgia, and my dad again co-signed on a used Isuzu NPR. I was all set up, and then it got real. My dad told me, hey man, you got 30 days to make your first payment. If you miss a payment, it's all going back. Now, I'm not sure how serious he was and if he would ever have followed through on that threat, but it didn't matter because I never missed a payment. But how? I had no clients, I had no experience. It was by far the dumbest decision I've ever made in my life, but it turned out to be the best decision I've ever made. On day one, I incorporated and created my company. I went to Kinko's at the time and had the guy behind the counter draw me up a very simple logo. I had calculated my overhead to make my payments and it came out to roughly $50 a day. Things were a lot cheaper back then. Now that I knew the amount of money that I needed to make, I got back in the truck and went to the neighborhood next to mine and just started driving around, see what I could drum up. Lo and behold, I was flagged down by a real estate agent who had a showing, an open house the next day. She came running outside and asked me if I could cut the grass before her event. And she told me,
I got $50 if you could do it.
and I thought to myself, damn, this is easier than I thought. Well, not so fast, big dog. Things are just now about to get real. So picture this, here I am about to cut this lady's grass for the very first time. Let me back up a little bit and tell you just a little story. When I purchased my mower from Howard Brothers, it was a 52-inch zero-turn Exmark, and I had no previous experience. I had no idea how to drive it. I literally had to ask the salesman if he could load it up on my truck because I didn't know how to drive it. I didn't know how to start it. I didn't know how to operate it. I knew nothing. He told me they weren't allowed to do that for liability purposes, but somehow I convinced him. Basically told him I'm gonna make a fool of myself right here in your parking lot, so please help me. So back back to the story. So here I am in this lady's front yard, ready to get started, and thankfully, she left because she didn't live there. She was just a listing agent and no one was watching, praise the Lord. So I started the mower and dropped the gates, and here we go. Boom! I went crashing down the ramp. And then it took me a few seconds to regain control, but not after I ran over a row of 4 small little crepe myrtles that she had planted alongside the driveway like 2 days prior. Just mowed them down. I actually ended up telling her that the problem was loose soil. I'll never forget that conversation. It was super embarrassing. She had to think that I was the most incompetent moron she had ever met. I mean, the stalks of the crepe myrtles had mower tracks on them. I spent a couple minutes in the driveway trying to figure out the controls, and off I went. I engaged the blades and I started mowing. Thankfully, I started all the way in the backyard because, what do you know, I laid one line and scalped the absolute hell out of this backyard. I turned around and looked and I said, oh this ain't good. So I raised the deck a couple notches and mowed the rest of the yard. The rest of it looked pretty good, but I had to somehow cover my tracks. I did the best I could by fading it in with a weed eater, and it was enough to blame, this poor workmanship on the drought we'd been having. Then it was time to get back on the mower and get it up the ramp on the Isuzu. Okay, being the novice that I was, I went up the ramp frontwards, and if you know anything about zero-turn mowers, the weight's all in the back because that's where the engine is. So I start going up this ramp. The 2 front wheels start lifting up, and it was like I was about to flip, and the controls were so touchy that every time I would correct it, it would slam down on the gate and then cause me to almost flip again. So picture this. So here I am in this lady's driveway, looking like an absolute idiot, just jackhammering my mower on the gate. Boom, 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 just like that. So I pulled off, thankfully, and I backed it up the gate backwards. I said, well, let's figure out how to do this and let's just back it up. Just like that, it was like a light came on. That's how you're supposed to do it, man. So that just goes to show you right there. You can have absolutely zero experience, but through hard work and grit, you can still make it. I was lucky enough to land a handful of clients because people liked me. I was a terrible landscaper, but I had the kind of personality that made people feel comfortable with me, and thankfully, this allowed me to get the necessary experience that I needed to learn the trade. Then came winter. Look, I started my company in the end of summer during a recession. As I said earlier, probably the dumbest decision I've ever made in my life. But somehow it worked out. I had a buddy of mine, Steven, who had a company that installed fixtures and promotional signage in gas stations and other retail spaces. And he was looking for installers throughout the winter, and since I had a big Isuzu truck, I was a perfect fit, because I could fit so many in my truck. He hired me and assigned me a bunch of projects, and my buddy Alex rode along with me and started knocking them out. We very quickly stood out as top performers for the company, and they decided to split us up and make us both crew leaders and assign us partners. Well, another blessing came from it as my partner was named Max. Max had been a lifelong landscaper and worked for a pretty successful company in my community and decided to step away for a period of time and do something else. And what do you know? Here he is in my truck spending 12 to 15 hours a day with me every single day. I can't tell you how much I learned from Max in that first winter. All we did was drive around and talk, and we spent so much time together. He had so much opportunity to teach me everything. Not only did he teach me things, but he introduced me to people in the industry, which helped me level up fast. Because remember, it's not just about what you know, it's about who you know, and your network is your net worth. So not only did this gig help me make my payments throughout the first winter, it also introduced me to somebody that would help me tremendously in the trade. It was an absolute blessing the way it worked out. To this day, I still talk to Max, and I'm forever grateful for all the things that he taught me throughout that winter and all the years since. After that winter gig was finished, we were coming into the early spring, and I was blessed again with another great opportunity. Alex, my best friend from high school, still to this day, who helped me all winter long with the fixture installations, he introduced me to a guy that he went to college with named Ryan. Ryan worked for a company that partnered with Remax, the real estate company. And remember, this was in 2010, 2011, so we were still in the height of the recession. Foreclosures in Atlanta were through the roof. Ryan's company was responsible for property preservation, which means these foreclosed properties that were owned by the bank needed to be kept up with so that they didn't become dilapidated and they could be auctioned off later down the road so that the bank could recoup their money, because the bank's not in the real estate business. So Ryan presented me with a contract that included about 100 properties to be serviced on a bi-weekly basis. Since they were foreclosed and abandoned, the level of service wasn't all that high. You could literally just mow, blow, and go. Your job was to keep it from looking abandoned. So it didn't have to be perfect, it just had to be kept up with, which meant that you could move super fast. We were doing like 20 of them within a day, sometimes by myself, sometimes with a helper. Now keep in mind, the route wasn't very dense. These were all over Metro Atlanta and North Georgia, so there was a lot of drive time. But even with the drive time, we were still doing 15 to 20 a day. And like I said, a lot of the times it was just me, but I could pull in a friend every now and again to help when I was behind. Alex, my best friend, was one of my helpers, and trust me, nobody could run an edger like this man. His edges were so damn deep, we called him Hard Edge edge mun. I'm super grateful for all my buddies who helped me get through that contract. Without them, I'm not sure I could have ever fulfilled them. And now that I made it through that year, I had to get contracts. So I used Craigslist back in the day to find an ad for a guy who was selling accounts. No equipment, no trucks, just accounts. Talk about another fortunate blessing. I didn't even have to pay for them. Crazy, right? Let me explain. So I responded to the ad on Craigslist and we set up a meeting at the Subway. It was the 4th of July. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was absolutely storming outside. We sat in a booth and we ate sandwiches while he told me all the details. It was all high-end clients in 3 country clubs near my house. How perfect, right? It was about 25 total accounts and all of them were 12-month accounts and they all required mulch and flowers and pine straw and all that other stuff. This was an absolute game changer for me. This was a level up from what I was used to, and now I would be able to hire employees since they were all 12-month contracts with enhancements. Now onto the details of the deal. This was unreal. It was about $60,000 a year for these maintenance contracts. All the enhancement work was on top of that, and it was all billable. This guy was billing his clients at the beginning of each month. So he would invoice them on the 1st, and then they would pay for that month in advance. That was something else I learned from him, and I still use that today. So the deal was this. He had already invoiced everybody since we met on the 4th, and I was to take over service on all the properties, and he would just sit back and collect that 1 month worth of payment, and that would be how I paid for the accounts. 1 month. And then starting in August, I would take over the invoicing and the clients would be all mine. He drafted a nice introduction letter and sent it out to everybody, and only one person decided to cancel, and we kept all the rest. So for me, there was absolutely no risk since I was already used to billing in arrears, meaning that I would cut the grass for an entire month before I would send the invoice. So under this invoicing system, I was risking nothing. I was actually just essentially being given $60,000 worth of accounts plus all the add-ons. This was an absolute blessing, but it wasn't just luck. It was something that I had manifested. I had thought about finding an opportunity like this, and I checked Craigslist multiple times a day, and I reached out to so many people that I could until this kind of fell in my lap. So yes, there was a bit of luck, but I also made it happen. So now here I am with 12-month contracts and I'm ready to rock. But remember, all these clients expect us to handle all their enhancements. Well, if you listen to the first parts of my story, I had no experience with any of this. So I called my friend Max, and he told me to call the guy that he worked for and see if I could subcontract him to do all the little side jobs and the pine straw and the mulch. Each one of these clients wanted 20 to 50 yards of mulch, and they wanted it right then. So I went to the office that Max sent me to, and all the install guys that worked for this guy were quitting just as I walked in. I had all my gear on, and they asked me as I was walking in if I had any work for them. That's exactly what I'm here for. And they told me that they are now independent and they would handle all that work. Wow, another fortunate piece of luck, or as I call it, a blessing. It's a blessing because it's not like I was just sitting on my ass waiting for stuff to fall on my lap. I was out there making things happen. I was meeting people and I was doing the hard work. The harder you work, the luckier you get. So apparently this guy owed them several weeks worth of pay, so they walked off the job, and in addition, they took a truck and a dingo and some other tools, and they were all set up and ready to go. All they needed was somebody to give them work, and I had the work. I just needed a crew. So I set up all the mulch deliveries for the following week, and we went out there and made more money in 7 days than I had ever made in my life. So now I have a crew that's capable of doing anything that has their own machines. I just need to keep them busy. We just came off of a 7-day period where we made almost $100,000 between all of us, and we wanted to continue riding that way. So I started using a service called Home Advisor. If anyone's familiar, stay away, right? It is pretty terrible, but for that stage of my business, it was perfect. I mean, after all, I didn't know how else to get any other leads. I didn't have a website at the time. I had a very limited marketing budget, and this seemed to make the most sense. And it worked for a little while, so I was able to land lots of smaller jobs. They were about $10,000 a piece, which was great because it kept my guys busy and it gave me the opportunity to get the experience and learn all the things that I'd never done before. Irrigation, retaining walls, pavers, grading, drainage, and everything else. All I had to do was sell it, price it right, and the guys would go knock it out super fast. And then after I would sell it, I would sit on the job site and I'd watch and I'd learn how they did everything so that I could learn and I could improve my sales tactics for the next sale. It worked great, and then one day, everything changed again. So I had a buddy of mine reach out to me and ask me if I could build him a little retaining wall in his backyard. I mean, this thing was tiny. It was about 2 feet tall and 80 feet long. Modular block, nothing too difficult. So I went and saw him and I said that I could absolutely do it now that I have the guys. Well, he told me that he wanted a landscape architect to design it. Can you believe that? I have no idea what the hell he was talking about, but I figured it was just standard. So I told him, cool. Now looking back, that was absolutely unrealistic and there was absolutely no reason for it. But since I had very limited experience to that point, I told him I'd get back to him. In my town, town, we have a local magazine. Pick it up at almost every restaurant, grocery store, even at like a doctor's office, and it's free, and it just sits there in the front. All they do is really market the local businesses to the community. Well, every monthly issue of the magazine included a column right in the very front. It was pretty comical. It's hilarious, actually. So I would read it first whenever I picked up the new edition. The column was written by the same guy. His name was Ed Sesniak, and he would sign his name at the end of the article, and underneath it would say owner, Georgian Landscape Design. Naturally, when my friend asked me to bring in an architect for his tiny little wall, I called Ed, and that's when everything changed again. So I call Ed, he picks up the phone after one ring. Amazing, right? And we talked for like an hour at least on the phone. And then Ed asked me if I wanted to go grab lunch at the local Mexican restaurant. I remember thinking to myself, man, this is gonna work out great. So we ate lunch and we just hit it off. We meshed like crazy and our relationship blossomed fast from that day on. So Ed had started his company about 15 years prior as a hobby. He had retired and he was bored, so he got his certification in landscape design and started his little business. It was just enough to keep him busy during the week, but nothing really extra or extravagant. The crew that he had subcontracted to do all of his projects all of a sudden was locked up on a job of their own. And this job was gonna take him like 6 months, so he had no crew and he had several jobs on the books. Talk about perfect timing. Another stroke of luck, or as I like to put it, another blessing. So I told him, hey man, I got a crew and we're ready to rock. We made a deal. After the first job, we knew that it was gonna work out really well between the both of us because our values were the same, which was quality work, great customer service. No matter what, always do right by your customer. And that's what really bonded us together. It was at that point that we decided that we were gonna just continue working together and team up in def. Rest is where it gets cool. So at that time, Ed was around 70 years old. Me, I was in like my early 30s. I looked at Ed like a mentor, like an uncle and a friend. And he looked at me like a protege and even like a son. Our relationship went fantastic and we continued to work together. And I took my portion of the revenue and reinvested it back into the company. I got the first office, I hired our first receptionist, I bought more trucks and equipment. Most importantly, I started spending money on marketing, Google ads, online profiles, robust websites, and direct mail. Ed was an extremely talented designer and salesperson. After all, he worked his entire career in sales, so that obviously helped immensely. I had the resources to get the job done, and together we were very successful. As I reinvested all of my earnings back into the company with new systems and processes, we grew exponentially. We were able to take our average job ticket from about $15,000 per job to over $80,000 per job. A few years ago, Ed decided that he was going to hang it up and move out to Charleston to spend more time with his daughter and his grandkids. That time, I became the sole owner of Georgian Landscape Design, and I was able to absorb it under my parent company, NGLM. So then I poured even more gas on the fire through investments and additional marketing. And now that side of the business does almost $4 million a year. We have 5 in-house landscape designers and 11 installation crews running around Atlanta every single day. And we can do anything and everything, including pools. Meeting Ed was nothing short of a blessing. I owe Ed a lot when it comes to my success as a business owner, a man, and a father. He taught me many valuable lessons that transcend well beyond running a landscape company. As I said earlier, it's not just luck. These were all things that I worked hard for, and when opportunity shows up, you have to capitalize. So even though it may sound like luck, it's actually just a result of having an idea and then putting forth the work to make that idea turn into reality. In 2020, I decided that I was going to venture out into commercial maintenance. I was done dealing with residential maintenance. As everyone knows, residential maintenance is where you have to start. There's lots of problems with it. You got picky customers, you got clients that don't pay. It's not sustainable when the economy turns. And as we all know, the landscaper is the last one to get paid and the first one to get fired, and nobody's ever really happy. So I was blessed to meet my beautiful wife, and when we were dating, she happened to be a property manager for a luxury apartment complex, right? Another blessing. And she was actually the one that told me that I needed to get into commercial maintenance. So she gave me some pointers and I ran with them. I joined all the organizations and networking groups that I could find and took a big risk and invested a lot of money into events, luncheons, and client engagement. I also took a risk and invested in additional trucks, equipment, and personnel so that I'd be ready when the opportunities started coming in. I started using LinkedIn and I became a so-called expert in LinkedIn and began getting a lot of traction from commercial clients. Right now, we do almost $3 million a year in commercial maintenance alone. And then along with all those comes several million dollars a year in enhancement work, along with several million dollars a year from construction projects that I would not have the opportunity to even participate in without that commercial clientele. And the opportunities just keep coming, as long as we continue to provide excellent customer service and a great client experience. And all that's on top of the residential design building build that we still do that generate several $million a year. So now our focus is on scaling our winning formula to other markets. We've done really well in the Atlanta market, and we have our sights set on Charlotte and Greenville in 2026. So that's where we are now, and that's the story of how we started and everything we went through to get here, with a glimpse of where we're going tomorrow. So remember, you can start with absolutely nothing and turn it into something great. It all starts with a vision, and then you have to work hard to create that vision. And the harder you work, the luckier you will get along the way.